Late evening, the kind where the house sounds bigger than it is. I came in through the garage door and found Emily already on the couch, curled on her side with a throw blanket pulled up to her shoulders like a shield. The TV was on but muted. Her face was turned toward the back cushions. "Food poisoning," she said without looking at me. Her voice had that thin, practiced weakness people use when they want the conversation to end early. "Don't come close. I'm gross." I stood there with my keys still in my hand, watching her breathe. Not dramatic, just controlled. Her phone sat on the coffee table, face down. Perfectly centered, like it had been placed carefully, not tossed. I set my lunchbox on the counter and asked, "Do you need anything?" "No," she said, too fast. "Just sleep." I was about to turn toward the kitchen when the doorbell rang. Not a knock. A firm, single press. I wiped my hands on my jeans and opened the door. A woman I'd never seen stood on the porch. Mid-30s. Plain coat. Eyes that didn't wander. "Hi," she said. "Are you Mark?" My throat tightened. "Yeah." She nodded once, like she'd confirmed something on a list. Then she looked past me, toward the living room, and said calmly, almost gently, "Your wife wasn't sick. She was with my husband." In that moment, my life split cleanly in two, before and after. Before that night, I would have told you my life was quiet in a way I'd earned. I worked operations for a mid-sized commercial contractor. Nothing glamorous, just the steady, grinding kind of work where you solve problems before anyone else even knows they exist. My days were schedules, crews, deliveries, weather delays, invoices that never matched the first number. I liked it because it was measurable. If you did the work, you could see the result. Emily and I had a small suburban house with vinyl siding that always looked a little too clean after I pressure washed it in the spring. A fenced backyard. A dog that thought every passing mail truck was a personal threat. We weren't the couple posting vacations every month, but we weren't struggling either. We paid our bills. We ate dinner at the same table most nights. We knew which floorboard creaked on the stairs and which cabinet door needed a firm push to shut. I thought that was the point. Not fireworks. Not constant excitement. Just stability. Emily used to come home and drop her purse on the same kitchen chair, kick off her shoes, and talk while I cooked. Work drama. Who said what in a meeting? Which coworker was angling for a promotion? Normal stuff. Then, sometime in late summer, the rhythm shifted. At first it was small. She started staying later at the office, saying there were trainings she couldn't get out of. A new certification. A workshop. Team building dinners. She said it like she was doing us a favor. Building her career, building our future. I nodded, because it made sense. People advance. People hustle. Then came the girls' nights. Not the old kind where she'd tell me the name of the restaurant and send a photo of a margarita as proof of life. These were vague. A quick, going out with the girls, while her eyes stayed on her phone. She'd come home with her makeup still intact, smelling like a clean, expensive soap I didn't recognize, not like a bar or fried appetizers. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I told myself not to become that guy. The suspicious husband. The one who audits his wife's time like she's an employee. I'd seen those men at job sites, always angry, always certain the world was disrespecting them. I didn't want to be that. Emily had never given me a reason, I said. Emily was just tired, I said. Emily deserved space, I said. Still, little details started stacking in my mind the way unused materials stack behind a shop. Not urgent, not dramatic, just there. Her phone stopped living on the counter. It lived with her. If she went to the bathroom, it went with her. If she took the trash out, it went with her. If it buzzed while she was in the shower, she'd step out dripping and grab it before it could ring twice. And when it wasn't in her hand, it was face down. Always face down. If I asked an innocent question, "What time do you think you'll be home?" she'd answer like I'd accused her of something. A quick edge in her voice. A sigh that said I was making her life harder. Then she'd soften it with a smile, like the edge hadn't been there, like I'd imagined it. There were nights I'd eat alone, the dog under the table, the house settling around us. I'd hear her car later, the garage door lifting, then the click of her shoes on the concrete. She'd come in talking fast, offering explanations before I asked. Traffic was insane. We stayed late. My phone died. I'd nod. I'd keep the peace. I'd tell myself this was normal. Because stability was success. That's what I believed. Right up until the night the doorbell rang and a stranger said my wife wasn't sick at all. After the woman on the porch spoke, she didn't wait for a reaction. She didn't ask to come inside. She just watched me the way someone watches a structural beam they already know is cracked. Then she said, "I'm sorry," not like an apology, but like a statement of fact, and walked back down the driveway. I closed the door and stood there longer than made sense. The lock clicked into place, loud in the quiet house. Emily hadn't moved. The TV still glowed blue against the walls, the sound still muted, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I didn't go back into the living room right away. I leaned my forehead against the door, felt the cold of it, and waited for something, anger, panic, disbelief, to show up and take over. Nothing did. There was only a strange, hollow focus, the same feeling I get on a job site when someone says a support failed and I have to assess the damage before anyone else gets hurt. When I finally stepped into the room, Emily was still lying the same way. She hadn't heard the conversation, or if she had, she didn't react. Her phone was still face down on the table, untouched. I didn't say anything. I went into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it slowly, like this was just another night and I was just another man winding down after work. That's when my mind started replaying things, not emotionally, but mechanically. The late nights lined up in a row. Tuesdays and Thursdays more often than not. The way she'd shower the moment she got home, even if it was close to midnight. The way she'd stand at the sink afterward, brushing her teeth longer than necessary, eyes fixed on nothing. The phone habits replayed next. The angle she held it at. The way she'd tilt the screen away from me, even when we were sitting on opposite ends of the couch. The sudden passwords on apps that never had them before. The way she'd tense if I reached for it to check the time. I remembered one night in particular, weeks earlier, when she'd laughed at something on her phone and then looked up at me too quickly, like she'd forgotten I was there. The laugh had stopped mid-breath. She'd said, "Work stuff," before I'd asked anything at all. I'd accepted that explanation, filed it away, moved on. Standing there in the kitchen, I realized how many times I'd done that. How often I'd chosen the easiest interpretation instead of the most accurate one. Not because I was naive, but because accuracy would have required action, and action would have threatened the life I thought I was maintaining. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't ask questions. I didn't check her phone. I didn't wake her when she eventually dragged herself upstairs with a groan and a hand pressed theatrically to her stomach. I watched. I listened. And something in me shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough that I could feel it settle into place. Like a level finding true horizontal after being slightly off for years. This wasn't a collection of random details anymore. It was a pattern. And patterns, once seen clearly, don't unsee themselves. Lying in bed later, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles above us, I understood something with quiet certainty. I didn't need to know everything yet. I just needed to stop lying to myself. That was the night I stopped trying to explain her behavior way in my head. The night suspicion stopped feeling like paranoia and started feeling like recognition. Not anger, not grief, just awareness, steady, cold, and awake. The test results showed up on a Tuesday. Not by email, not through a phone call. A plain envelope in the mail, folded and sealed like it was any other piece of junk trying to look official. Emily had gone to a clinic the week before, claiming the food poisoning had turned into something worse. She'd played it up, hand on her stomach, eyes half-lidded, little noises when she stood up, like she was auditioning for sympathy. I didn't argue. I drove her there because that's what I'd always done. Took care of the logistics. Kept the engine running while she went in. Brought her home. Made her soup she barely touched. The envelope was addressed to her, but the return label had the clinic's name printed clean and sharp. It sat on the counter with the rest of the mail, grocery circulars, a coupon booklet, a water bill, and I stared at it longer than I stared at anything else that day. Emily was in the shower. The dog was asleep under the table. The house was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator cycling. I didn't open it right away. I'm not proud of that moment, but I'm not ashamed either. I'd spent months giving her the benefit of the doubt. I'd spent the last week replaying Sarah's words until they felt less like an accusation and more like a diagnosis. At some point, privacy becomes a shield for dishonesty. I wasn't tearing open love letters. I was looking at the foundation of my life to see if it was still solid. I slid a finger under the flap and pulled. Inside were lab results and a short note, clinical language, small fonts, checkboxes. The kind of paperwork that tries to sound neutral while it quietly changes your future. My eyes went to the highlighted lines first. Then to the words I'd never had to read in relation to my marriage. A positive result. An infection. Not the kind you get from bad food. I read it twice. Then a third time, slower, like the letters might rearrange themselves into something less final. They didn't. What surprised me wasn't the information. It was my body's reaction. No heat in my face. No trembling hands. No rush of anger that made me want to throw something. I just felt clean. Like a fog had lifted and left the room cold. All the little inconsistencies, late nights, face-down phone, the sharp defensiveness, clicked into place with a simple, undeniable conclusion. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't me being insecure. This wasn't a phase or stress or needing space. This was proof. The shower shut off upstairs. Water pipes ticked as they cooled. Emily's footsteps moved across the bedroom floor. I slid the papers back into the envelope and set it exactly where I'd found it, aligned with the edge of the counter. She came downstairs in sweatpants and a clean hoodie, hair damp, looking lighter than she'd looked in days. She poured herself coffee like she wasn't sick at all. Like her stomach had never hurt. Like the whole performance was over. "How you feeling?" I asked, because the old version of me still knew his lines. "Better," she said. Finally. That was brutal. She didn't look at the mail. I watched her move around the kitchen, and I felt something inside me separate, quietly, neatly, like two boards pried apart after the nails have already snapped. I realized I had been trying to fix the marriage in my head for weeks, building explanations, smoothing edges, telling myself we could talk it out if I found the right approach. Standing there with those results still warm in my mind, that effort stopped. Not dramatically. Just ended. I didn't decide to punish her. I didn't decide to destroy anything. I simply accepted the truth as it was, without negotiating with it. Denial is noisy. It takes energy. It argues, it bargains, it invents. Clarity doesn't do any of that. Clarity just sits there, steady and quiet, and lets everything else fall away. After that, I stopped participating. Not in any way that was obvious. I still answered when she spoke. I still asked surface questions. I still showed up where I was expected to show up. From the outside, nothing changed. But internally, I stepped back far enough to see her clearly, the way you step back from a blueprint to understand how the whole structure actually works. Emily's habits didn't change. That was the first thing I noticed. If anything, they became more consistent. The late nights followed the same pattern, 2, sometimes 3 a week. Always midweek, rarely weekends. The excuses rotated, but the timing didn't. Training ran long. We grabbed a bite after. Traffic was awful. The words changed, but the empty hours stayed the same length, like blocks on a calendar she couldn't move. Her phone never left her side. Not once. If she set it down, it was face down. If it buzzed, her body reacted before her mind did, shoulders tightening, eyes flicking toward it, hand already reaching. She'd glance at the screen and then deliberately not say anything, like silence itself was a form of camouflage. I didn't ask who she was texting. I didn't ask where she was going. I let her tell me what she wanted me to know, and I paid attention to what she didn't. I started keeping track quietly. Not obsessively, just accurately. Dates, times, the nights she claimed she was somewhere versus the nights she came home showered and alert instead of tired. The way she'd suddenly start a load of laundry at 10:30 at night, as if the clothes themselves needed immediate attention. The way she'd brush her teeth twice. I checked our shared calendar. Events she'd added disappeared later. Appointments moved without explanation. I didn't confront her. I took screenshots and saved them to a folder on my work laptop labeled, Invoices, Q4. It wasn't clever. It just wasn't emotional. I pulled phone records one afternoon while she was out. Not messages, just call logs. Numbers I didn't recognize appeared regularly, always during the same windows of time. I didn't call them. I didn't reverse search them. I just noted how often they showed up and how rarely they showed up when I was home. At night, lying next to her, I listened instead of trying to sleep. Her breathing changed when she thought I was asleep. It went lighter, faster. Sometimes she'd roll away and scroll, the faint glow of the screen reflecting off the wall. I'd keep my eyes closed and count the seconds between taps. What surprised me most was how calm I felt. Not numb, not detached, just steady. The tension came from waiting, not from confusion. I knew what was happening now. I didn't need her to confirm it. I didn't need a confession to validate the facts already lining up on their own. I understood something important during that stretch of time. Reacting would only reset the pattern. She'd cry, she'd deny, she'd reframe, she'd promise change without explaining the past. And I'd be back where I started, trying to manage something that wasn't mine to manage. So I stayed still. I let the facts pile up until they felt heavy enough to stand on by themselves. I let the silence do its work. Every lie needs momentum. Every deception depends on the other person pushing back just enough to keep the dance going. When you stop pushing, the other person has to carry all of it alone. And Emily was already getting tired. I could see it in the way she watched me now, like she was waiting for a reaction that never came. Like she could feel the distance forming but couldn't find the seam to pull it apart. I wasn't waiting for the right moment to explode. I was waiting for the truth to finish unfolding on its own. I met Sarah 3 days later. She suggested a roadside cafe just off the highway, the kind of place truckers stop because the coffee is strong and the booths are bolted to the floor. Neutral ground, no atmosphere, no distractions. I got there early and chose a booth where my back was to the wall. She walked in exactly on time. Up close, she looked more tired than she had on my porch. Not frantic, just worn down in a way that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long. She didn't hug me or offer condolences. She slid into the booth, set her purse beside her, and ordered coffee. I didn't want to do this over text, she said once the waitress left. Too easy to misinterpret. I nodded. I appreciate you coming. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. Not thick, not dramatic, just enough to matter. She set it on the table between us and didn't open it yet. I found out about them 6 weeks ago, she said. I didn't tell you right away because I needed to be sure. I needed proof. I didn't ask how she'd found out. People always find out the same way, patterns breaking, lies colliding, intuition refusing to stay quiet. The details didn't matter as much as the structure. She opened the folder. Inside were printed hotel receipts. Same chain, same location, always midweek. Ride histories with pickup and drop-off times that matched the gaps I'd been logging at home. Screenshots of messages, not explicit, not romantic in the way movies make them. Practical, coordinated, familiar. I recognized the tone immediately. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a single bad decision spiraling out of control. It was a system, a routine, two people fitting time together the way you fit meetings into a workday. That's Ryan, she said, pointing to one of the names. My husband. I didn't flinch. I'd already seen his number on our phone records enough times to know the shape of it. They've been seeing each other for almost a year, she continued. Long enough to stop pretending it's complicated. We sat in silence while the waitress refilled our cups. The normalcy of it, the clink of ceramic, the smell of bacon from the kitchen, felt almost insulting. What got me, Sarah said finally, was realizing how similar their stories were. Same excuses, same timing, same words. I thought of Emily's rehearsed lines. The way she'd offer explanations before I asked. The way her stories always had just enough detail to sound true. They weren't reacting to their lives, Sarah said. They were scheduling around them. That landed cleanly. What I'd taken personally, the neglect, the secrecy, the emotional distance, suddenly looked procedural. Like damage from a machine that didn't care who it ran over, as long as it kept moving. We went through the rest of the folder together. Dates, locations, messages about being careful, about phones, about not getting caught. Neither of us raised our voices. Neither of us cried. It wasn't that kind of meeting. This isn't about revenge, Sarah said. I'm done trying to manage him. I just don't want to be gaslit anymore. I understood that immediately. We talked logistics instead of feelings. What we'd each confirmed, what we hadn't, what steps we were considering. The conversation stayed grounded because neither of us needed validation anymore. The facts were doing that work on their own. When we stood to leave, Sarah paused. I'm coming by your house tonight, she said. If that's okay. I think it's time this stops being theoretical. I didn't hesitate. It's okay. Driving home, I realized something had shifted again, but this time outward. What had felt like a personal failure, a private humiliation, had expanded. It wasn't just my marriage anymore. It was a shared lie stretching across two households, sustained by the same routines, the same justifications. Seeing it laid out like that didn't make it hurt more. It made it smaller, manageable, and for the first time since the doorbell rang, I felt ready for the next step, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to wonder about. Sarah arrived just after 7. I heard her car before the doorbell, tires on gravel, an engine idling for a second longer than necessary. When I opened the door, Emily was still upstairs, moving around the bedroom with the casual noise of someone who believes the evening is under control. Sarah stepped inside without hesitation. She didn't look around the house. She didn't comment on anything. She set her coat over the back of a chair and placed her purse on the kitchen table like she belonged there, like this was simply the next scheduled stop in a long day. Emily came down halfway through it. She froze when she saw Sarah. Not dramatically. Just enough to tell the truth. Her hand tightened on the banister. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to the stranger standing in our kitchen. "What's going on?" she asked, already defensive. Sarah didn't answer right away. She pulled the envelope from her purse, the clinic paperwork I'd put back exactly where I'd found it, and slid it across the table. "I'm going to read this," she said calmly. "Then you can say whatever you want." Emily's face drained of color. "You went through my things?" Emily said to me, her voice sharp, accusatory. A pivot. An attempt to regain footing. I didn't respond. Sarah unfolded the papers and read the results out loud. No commentary. No emphasis. Just the facts, spoken clearly in the quiet kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The dog lifted his head and then settled again. Emily interrupted halfway through. "This is private. You don't know what you're talking about." Sarah didn't stop. When she finished, she folded the papers and set them down. "This doesn't come from food poisoning," she said. "You know that. And so do I." Emily turned to me then. Fully. Urgently. "Mark, this isn't what it looks like," she said, the sentence already collapsing under its own weight. "I can explain." I watched her carefully. The posture. The tone. The way she reached for control instead of honesty. I didn't ask for an explanation. I didn't ask who, or how long, or why. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even change my expression. "I know," I said. 2 words. Flat. Finished. That seemed to unbalance her more than anything else. She started talking faster, offering fragments instead of a story. Stress. A mistake. Feeling lonely. Not knowing how to say something. Promises threaded through excuses, none of them landing anywhere solid. Sarah stood quietly while Emily spoke, like she was watching weather pass through. "I didn't come here to argue," Sarah said when Emily finally ran out of momentum. "I came here so this stops being a story you control." Emily looked between us, realizing for the first time that this wasn't a confrontation she could steer. That there would be no negotiation, no reframing that put her back in the center. I leaned against the counter and listened, not to her words, but to the absence behind them. No accountability. No timeline. No recognition of damage beyond how it affected her. That's when I understood how much my role had changed. I wasn't the husband trying to save something. I wasn't the man demanding answers. I wasn't even the one delivering consequences. I was simply no longer participating in the lie. Emily asked me what I wanted. Not softly. Desperately. "I want you to stop," I said. "That's all." She stared at me, confused. "Stop what?" "Stop pretending," I said. "Stop managing. Stop performing." Sarah picked up her purse then. "I'm done," she said. "You'll hear from my attorney." She nodded to me once before leaving. Emily stood in the kitchen long after the door closed, arms crossed like she was bracing against cold. Nothing else needed to be said. The truth had already taken up all the space in the room. After that night, I stopped pushing the timeline. There was no dramatic fallout the next morning. No slammed doors. No shouting matches that bled into neighbors' yards. Emily slept in the guest room without asking. I went to work like I always did. The world didn't pause just because my marriage had finally collapsed into the shape it had been heading toward for months. The conversations that followed were practical. We talked about schedules first, who would be home when, how we'd handle the dog, which spaces were effectively off limits to avoid unnecessary friction. It sounded like a project meeting, and that was fine by me. Emotion complicates logistics. Logistics, at least, can be solved. She tried a few times to circle back to feelings. To rewrite the narrative in softer terms. "We've both changed. We stopped communicating. I didn't think it would go this far." Each sentence was framed to dilute responsibility, to spread the weight evenly so no one had to carry it fully. I didn't argue. Arguing would have meant engaging with the premise that this was still something to be negotiated. It wasn't. The structure was already compromised. You don't debate load limits after a beam snaps. Family found out in fragments. Her parents first, then mine. The reactions varied: shock, disappointment, awkward silence, but none of them changed the outcome. I didn't offer explanations beyond what was necessary. I didn't defend myself. I didn't present evidence unless asked directly. I contacted an attorney the same week. Quietly. Efficiently. I didn't tell Emily until the paperwork was already drafted. Not as a power move, but because clarity travels faster than promises. Once the process started, the emotional fog thinned on its own. She moved out gradually. A box here, a suitcase there. Each trip took something familiar with it. Coffee mugs, framed photos, a sweater she'd left draped over a chair for years. The house got emptier in a way that felt deliberate, like it was shedding weight instead of losing something essential. There were moments when she lingered, standing in doorways, as if waiting for me to stop her. To say something definitive, to fight. I didn't. Silence wasn't punishment. It was accuracy. The fewer words I used, the less room there was for distortion. Every time I stayed calm, every time I refused to chase an explanation or a reconciliation that didn't address the truth, the situation resolved itself further without my intervention. I watched her struggle with that. Not cruelly, just observantly. People who are used to managing outcomes panic when they realize the other person has stepped outside the system entirely. There's nothing to push against. No leverage. No script that works. Eventually, the distance stopped feeling temporary. It settled into permanence. The paperwork moved forward. Accounts separated. Routines adjusted. Evenings got quieter, not in a lonely way, but in a clean one. The kind of quiet that doesn't require vigilance. I didn't announce my decision to anyone. I didn't make a speech about self-respect or betrayal. I let the situation conclude under its own weight. Because the truth doesn't need help ending a lie. All it needs is for someone to stop holding it together. The house felt different once Emily was gone. Not emptier in the way I'd expected. Not hollow or echoing. It felt accurate. Like a room after unnecessary furniture has been moved out and you can finally see how big it actually is. I walked through it slowly the first night I was alone. Not searching for memories, not avoiding them either. Just taking inventory. The couch where she'd claimed food poisoning. The coffee table where her phone used to sit face down like a warning sign. The kitchen counter where the envelope had rested, ordinary and devastating at the same time. Nothing needed to be thrown away in anger. Nothing needed to be preserved for nostalgia. Objects were just objects again. I slept better than I had in months. No half waking to the glow of a phone screen. No waiting for headlights in the driveway. No running timelines in my head, trying to make stories align. My body seemed to understand before my mind fully caught up. There was no longer a threat to monitor. In the days that followed, people asked careful questions. How are you holding up? Are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? I answered honestly but briefly. I'm fine. I'm handling it. There's not much to say. That wasn't avoidance. It was resolution. I didn't feel the need to explain my decision because I hadn't made it emotionally. It had emerged naturally once denial was gone. You don't justify stepping out of a burning building. You just step out. There was no victory in it. No sense of having won something. If anything, it felt like closing a file that had been miscategorized for too long. The contents hadn't changed, only my willingness to label them correctly. Some nights, I sat on the back porch with the dog and listened to the neighborhood settle. Lawn sprinklers clicking off. A television muffled through open windows. A car passing too fast down the street. Life continuing in all the small, unremarkable ways it always does. I thought about who I'd been before all this. The man who believed stability meant success, who equated quiet with safety, who ignored the subtle signals because acknowledging them would require disruption. I didn't judge that version of myself. He'd done the best he could with the information he allowed himself to see. But I wasn't him anymore. I'd learned something simple and permanent. Peace doesn't come from maintaining appearances. It comes from alignment, from living in a reality that doesn't require constant adjustment to stay believable. I didn't miss Emily the way I thought I might. I missed the idea of what I believed we had. And once that distinction became clear, the missing lost its weight. There was no dramatic closing scene. No final confrontation. No last message that tied everything up neatly. Just a quiet, irreversible step out of a lie I hadn't known I was living in for years. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Life didn't reinvent itself after that. It just simplified. Mornings came without tension. I woke up when the alarm went off, not a minute earlier, not a minute later. Coffee tasted like coffee again. The house stayed clean because there was nothing in it that needed explaining. Silence stopped feeling like something to fill and started feeling like something earned. I kept the routines that mattered. Work, the dog, evenings spent fixing small things around the house that had been ignored for years because I was always managing something else. I didn't rush to replace what I'd lost. There was nothing missing that needed immediate substitution. What changed wasn't my situation, it was my tolerance. I no longer ignored that quiet tightening in my chest when something didn't line up. I no longer explained away patterns just because acknowledging them would be inconvenient. I trusted the part of myself that notices, that tracks, that understands long before words catch up. I didn't become harder. I became clearer. There was no bitterness carried forward, no story I rehearsed for sympathy. What happened didn't define me. What defined me was how cleanly I stepped out once the truth was undeniable. Some nights, I stood in the doorway before turning out the lights and felt something close to gratitude, not for the betrayal, but for the end of confusion. For the certainty that came after. For the calm that follows when you finally stop negotiating with reality. Life moved on, quieter, cleaner, honest, and so did I.